my union PCS has been so involved in the conference itself. People have already heard from Chris Boff, our Assistant General Secretary, earlier today, and I'm very proud that we are at the forefront of the trade union movement in arguing for climate justice and the need to join up the climate movement with the trade union movement so that we don't allow people to play one off against the other, and we understand what our end goals are for what pressures that we have to get through in the here and now as we see tens of thousands of workers lose their jobs through austerity cuts and communities face devastation. So my starting point really is to say that's why we're here, that's why we're proud to be part of the movement that you all represent and are active in. And that's why we have to recognise what a long way we have to go to get the rest of the trade union movement on side and campaigning for climate justice and linking it very much, as we just heard from the last speaker, to economic and social justice. Now I am late and I apologise because I've spent all morning at the Labour CND conference where I'll be going back to later on, and there's a really nice connection because that conference is in the short term debating how to ensure that we mobilise the maximum amount of people on the anti-Trident demonstration on the 26th of February, that we try to stop Parliament voting to renew Trident nuclear missiles, but even if we don't stop, that we go into the 2020 election with people like Caroline, people like the SNP and a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party who will go into that election and say, if you elect us, we will stop the renewal of Trident. Now why I think there's such a connection between where I've just been and why I'm here now is that some of the obstacles that we are encountering in the trade union movement around the Trident debate are exactly the type of obstacles we've got to overcome in the wider climate movement to try and say that trade unions and environmentalists should work together hand in glove and not be pitched one against the other. And that's not always easy, but it's something we have to commit ourselves to. Because we will always struggle if the union movement is not part of what you're trying to do, because people who want to divide us will play one off against another. So what's the example? Well, let's just look at the Trident example again for a moment. Right? Some of Britain's biggest unions at the moment are the most vociferous supporters of renewing Trident because they say what matters most is jobs in the community. Now, jobs in the community are, of course, important. But we cannot say that even if that argument was true, that it trumps our moral responsibilities, our international responsibilities, and our responsibilities to the generations to come, who should be able to live in a nuclear-free world, and also a world where we do something about greenhouse emissions and we want to ensure that the planet is not under threat. So yes, jobs are important, but do they really trump the argument about long-term prosperity and security and the type of world we want to live in? No, of course they don't. But of course they are important arguments, because if you think your job is at stake today, you want to do everything you can to defend that job. So what we have to talk about here is a diversification, a transitional movement that actually says we can do more about climate, we cannot renew our Trident nuclear missiles by investing money for things that are socially productive. 1 million climate jobs, a house building programme, infrastructure. We should say no nuclear weapons, let's invest in our communities. And if we plan for that now, we can get over those union leaders who very snidely say this is about the Costa Coffee middle class brigade who don't care about what happens in our communities when we are trying to defend jobs. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but that makes my blood boil. It makes my blood boil because I grew up in a community devastated by pit closures. I spent the next 15 years of my life in Sheffield, a community that's devastated by closures in the steel industry. So I passionately care about what happens to our communities. But I don't have a short-term analysis of just say, all that matters is today, and I don't care about what's coming down the track. So what we have to do is ensure that we are part now of campaigning at workplace and grassroots level, in campaigns the length and breadth of the country, whether it's opposing fracking, whether it is defending jobs, whether it is arguing for investment and proper training and skills for climate jobs, or in the here and now trying to stop the squandering of hundreds of billions of pounds on nuclear weapons that we do not need. And that's the challenge for us, I think, in the trade union movement. And that's a challenge for all of you, I think, to see the trade union movement as an important ally that we want to work with and that we ensure that we get as much unity as we can at grassroots level. Now, if we do that, I think we are on the verge of a very, very exciting period ahead. Things that have been seen as conventional wisdoms can be challenged. The new politics that everybody talks about gives massive opportunities, I think, for the climate movement as well as for the trade union and labour movement. But we've got to be principled, I think we've got to be brave, and we've got to be prepared to really make the arguments that matter. So at the moment, we have to say something to people in the steel industry, whose communities and whose jobs are being decimated. And why aren't we getting politicians saying that those jobs in the steel industry, they could be used to build wind turbines, to ensure that people can be employed. Why can't people be employed to build not hundreds of thousands but millions of new houses? Council houses, houses that are environmentally friendly. Why can't people whose current expertise is being used to develop weapons of mass destruction actually be used to develop technologies that can improve our health service and our education service? I have a little anecdotal story myself about how I can see how that needs to be related to people. This thing I have hanging around my neck is a device that essentially powers an artificial mechanical heart that currently keeps me alive while I wait for a heart transplant. And whilst I'm waiting for a heart transplant, many people less fortunate than me were not able to benefit from technological progress in the NHS that allows me now to have this metal heart that externally powered by batteries and by electricity that keeps me going until such a time as I can have a transplant. And do you know what? This device cost the NHS £140,000. And there are people in this country today dying who could be saved because they live in parts of the country where the NHS will not fund the money needed to keep them alive. It's the same in terms of cancer treatment and so many problems in our health service where people today are dying who could benefit from the technology that we know is there if we just invested in it. So what we have to say at the moment is, that's not utopia, that's not pie in the sky. Isn't pie in the sky to say that we can have an environmentally friendly planet, that we can have new types of energy, that we can have houses that are environmentally friendly, that we can have a better health service and a better education service. We can do it. And if ever you know how we can do it, is in the week where we see the scandal of big business and Google avoiding paying their taxes that if they were made to pay them would help fund the type of movement we need in terms of our future. So I want to really close by saying that there will be those who will do everything they can to constantly try and divide your movement from the labour and trade union movement. I'll give you one final example, the third runway at Heathrow. Now PCS are very proud, not only I think is one of Britain's leading unions in advocating climate justice and a million climate jobs, has been at the forefront of arguing against a third runway at Heathrow. So what's happening there is we are coming up against unions who are making the argument that there are tens and hundreds of thousands of jobs that are dependent on a third runway at Heathrow, much in the same way as they're doing now about nuclear weapons. We have members whose jobs are affected about what happens in aviation and in terms of Heathrow. But do you know what? In our union, when this issue was most sharply polarised, when we came out against Trident, we represent tens of thousands of people in the Ministry of Defence. We represent people who work in nuclear bases in Devonport, in Faslane, on the Clyde. And we could have said, look, we're a union, we've got to just say nothing here because our members work there, or we could do what we did. Was we went in, we wrote to every member, we arranged workplace meetings, and we made the case that people needn't lose their jobs. We could have skilled jobs doing far more productive things if we work together, and that we shouldn't just take a short-term view that says your job means we haven't got anything to say to you, or B, means we always have to appear on the sidelines. And we're doing the same about the third runway at Heathrow. We also did it, incidentally, on a linked point, for those members we represent in the Home Office, including in the border force, who have to do some pretty terrible jobs in terms of asylum. And that doesn't mean we sit back and say we support the asylum system. We lead the campaign that says it stinks. Refugees should be welcome here. We should be a humane country and not be rounding people up to deport them. Join up. Because in supporting that campaign, we had to deal with a situation where asylum campaigners in Glasgow occupied a civil service workplace where Border Force staff worked who were part of the system of making sure that people were deported. So we had to represent the workforce, but we also had to have a higher moral principle about the type of society we want to live in. So we didn't stand away from it, we went in there. We said to our friends, our members, people shouldn't blame you for the job they do, they should blame the governments that give you these stinking policies that you have to implement. But we also want to make it clear that whilst we represent people at work, we want to change in the asylum system, we want to stop people being deported, and actually we want to welcome people to this country. Now some members found that uncomfortable, but we did it. Some of our members in defence found it uncomfortable when we came out against nuclear weapons. Some of our members might now think we shouldn't be talking about the climate because we should just be focusing on fighting austerity. I think what we have to say, and our contribution is, you know, all of these things are important. We can support people in the here and now. We should fight for trade union justice, for decent wages and for long-term skilled jobs. We should be fighting for a world free of nuclear weapons, and we should be fighting in the here and now for a world that takes climate seriously, does not look the other way, and does not let our enemies divide us. At the end of the day, if this country can find billions to bail out the banks, it should find billions to invest in a safer world, a climate that is one that we can ensure does not mean that we will see disaster after disaster, and a world that is just for migrants today and without nuclear weapons. My union wants to play a part in that. I pay credit to the work that Chris has done on behalf of PCS. I thank people for coming to the conference, and let's say, let's march together, let's work together, let's fight together, because a better world is possible and we've got to make that happen.